The phone's shrill ring cut through the morning silence like a blade. I stared at it from across my kitchen table, steam rising from my untouched coffee, watching the caller ID flash. Harper, my daughter's name. 3 weeks since Scott's funeral, and this was her first call. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. I let it ring 4 times before answering. Mom, I need Dad's watches. No greeting, no pretense of concern. Her voice carried that familiar edge of entitlement that had sharpened over the years. Donald has been eyeing them forever, and honestly, they're just sitting there collecting dust. My fingers tightened around the phone. The watch collection sat in Scott's study exactly as he'd left it. 12 pristine timepieces displayed in the mahogany case he'd built himself. Each one told a story. The Omega he'd bought with his first real paycheck, the vintage Rolex I'd given him for our 25th anniversary, the simple Timex that had survived Vietnam. Harper, I said quietly, setting down my cup with deliberate care. You didn't come to the funeral. I explained that. Penelope had the flu and Donald couldn't get time off. We sent flowers. Funeral flowers ordered online, delivered with a generic card. I'd read it aloud at the graveside to fill the awful silence where her voice should have been. 23. People came to honor Scott's memory. His daughter wasn't one of them. The watches are perfect for Donald, she continued, steamrolling past my silence. He appreciates quality, unlike some people. He knows their value. Their value. I closed my eyes, remembering Scott's hands as he'd wound each watch, his careful explanations of their mechanisms, his quiet pride in the collection he'd built over 30 years. Harper had rolled her eyes whenever he'd tried to share that passion. With her. Boring old man stuff, she'd called it. I'll think about it, I said. What's to think about? They're just going to sit there. At least Donald will use them. Her voice rose, taking on that petulant tone I remembered from her teenage years. God, Mom, you're being ridiculous. Dad's dead. Holding on to his stuff isn't going to bring him back. The words hit like a physical blow. I stood slowly, my legs suddenly unsteady, and walked to the window overlooking Scott's garden. The roses he'd planted were blooming, deep red blooms he'd never see. I said, I'll think about it. Fine, but don't take forever. Donald has a work dinner next week, and the Rolex would be perfect. The line went dead. I held the phone until the dial tone became unbearable, then placed it gently on the counter. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the heavy, pressing silence of a house that had held 2 voices for 34 years and now echoed with only 1 dot. In Scott's study, dust motes danced in the afternoon light, streaming through windows he'd cleaned just weeks before the cancer took him. His chair still held the impression of his body. His reading glasses lay folded on the desk beside a half-finished crossword puzzle. And there, in the corner, the watch collection gleamed behind glass. I opened the case and lifted the Rolex, my anniversary gift to him. The weight of it surprised me, as it always had. Scott's wrists had been thin by the end, but he'd worn this watch to every important occasion. Our children's graduations, his retirement dinner, Penelope's baptism. The band still held the scent of his cologne. My phone buzzed with a text from Harper. Donald says, thanks in advance. He'll take good care of them. I stared at the message until the words blurred. When had my daughter become someone who took rather than asked? When had she learned to speak of her father's possessions as if they were already hers? The answer came with uncomfortable clarity. I had taught her years of giving in, of smoothing over conflicts, of prioritizing peace over principle. Scott had called it enabling. I'd called it love. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a box of Scott's letters, notes he'd written to me over the years, tucked into my purse, left on my pillow, slipped into books I was reading. In the final months, as the treatments failed, and we both knew time was short, he'd written more frequently. His handwriting had grown shaky, but his words remained clear. One letter dated just 2 weeks before he died made me stop breathing. My darling Lillian, I worry about what will happen when I'm gone. Not because I doubt your strength. You're the strongest person I know, but because you've spent so many years putting everyone else's needs before your own. Harper has learned to take advantage of your generous heart. She doesn't see the woman who built a successful career while raising 2 children, who nursed her own mother through dementia, who held this family together through every crisis. She sees only what she can extract from you. Please don't let my death become another opportunity for her to take without giving. You deserve better than that. We both know she's capable of more, but she won't find it if you continue to enable her selfishness. Be strong, my love, for yourself. Finally, I read the letter 3 times, Scott's voice clear in every word. He'd seen what I'd been too close to acknowledge. My daughter had learned that absence could be a weapon, that guilt was currency, that love meant getting what you wanted without paying the price of a genuine relationship. My phone rang again. Harper. Mom, Donald is really excited about the watches. Can you overnight them? He has that dinner Thursday. I looked at Scott's letter in my hands, at the box of memories surrounding me, at the empty chair where my husband used to sit. Something crystallized in my chest. Not anger exactly, but a cold, clear certainty. No comma, I said. What? I said, no, Harper. The watches aren't available. What do you mean not available? They're Dad's watches. He's dead. You can't use them. The casual cruelty of her words settled over me like armor. I can do whatever I choose with your father's belongings. This is ridiculous. Donald can buy his own watches. My voice remained steady, calm, just as you could have bought your own plane ticket to your father's funeral. Silence stretched between us. When Harper spoke again, her voice had shifted to the manipulative sweetness she'd perfected in childhood. Mom, I know you're grieving. You're not thinking clearly. Dad would want Donald to have those watches. He'd want them to be appreciated. Would he? I touched Scott's letter. Your father spent the last 5 years watching you visit maybe twice. A year, usually when you needed something. He watched you skip family dinners, ignore his calls, treat his grandchild like an inconvenience when we wanted to spend time with her. He watched you marry a man who never bothered to learn his name correctly. It's Scott, not Bob, as I corrected Donald at every family gathering for 3 years. That's not fair. True. I stood, Scott's letter still in my hand. Your father died, hoping you might find time to say goodbye. He died, disappointed. The silence that followed was different. Shocked, perhaps, or calculating. Harper had never heard me speak with such direct clarity about her behavior. I'd spent years softening edges, making excuses, protecting her from consequences. Fine, she said finally, her voice ice cold. Keep the watches. Keep everything. See if I care. The line went dead. I sat in the growing darkness of my kitchen, surrounded by the weight of 34 years of marriage, of compromise, of love given and taken, and sometimes squandered. Scott's letter rested on the table before me, his words a roadmap to a future I'd never imagined. One where I stopped giving pieces of myself to people who had learned to expect them without gratitude. Outside, night was falling. Inside, something new was beginning. The phone remained mercifully silent for 3 days. Silence stretched between Harper and me like a chasm. Neither of us seemed willing to cross. I found myself moving through the house differently, no longer tiptoeing around corners as if Scott might still be sleeping, no longer automatically reaching for my phone to call Harper with small updates about my day. The absence of her demanding voice felt strange, not peaceful exactly, but clean. I spent those days reading Scott's letters chronologically, watching our marriage unfold in his careful handwriting. The early notes were playful, romantic. The middle years brought practical concerns mixed with declarations of love. But the final letters, written as cancer carved away his strength, revealed a man watching his family with clear, uncompromising eyes. Lillian, he'd written 6 months before his death. Harper called today asking for money for Penelope's dance lessons. When I mentioned we hadn't seen them in 2 months, she said they were busy living their lives. She spoke as if our desire to spend time with our granddaughter was selfish, as if love were an imposition. I gave her the money, but I'm tired of being treated like an ATM with a heartbeat. We raised her better than this. Another letter from 3 months later. Donald called me Bob again today. After 3 years of marriage to my daughter, he can't remember my name, but he remembers every detail of my tool collection he'd like to borrow. Harper laughed when I corrected him. Our daughter finds her husband's disrespect amusing. When did we become so disposable to her? And then the letter that made my chest tighten with recognition. I understand now why my father became so stern in his final years. It wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. When you're dying, pretense becomes impossible. You see your children as they truly are, not as you hoped they'd become. Harper loves us, but only as supporting characters in her life. We're expected to provide, never to need, to give, never to receive, to disappear quietly when we're no longer useful. I won't do that to you, Lillian. When I'm gone, please remember that you deserve better than being treated like a convenience store. On Thursday morning, the day of Donald's work dinner, when he would have worn Scott's Rolex, my phone rang. Not Harper this time. Donald, Lillian. Hey! His voice carried forced cheer, the tone of someone attempting to charm a difficult relative. How are you holding up? I sat down my coffee, noting how he still couldn't manage to call me Mom, even after 3 years of marriage to my daughter. I'm fine, Donald. Thank you. Good. Good. Listen, Harper mentioned there might be some confusion about Scott's watch collection. I wanted to clear that up. He paused, and I could picture him consulting notes Harper had probably written for him. Those watches are really going to waste just sitting there. I'd take excellent care of them. And Bob, Scott would want them to be worn, right? He was practical about things like that. Bob, even now, even calling specifically about Scott's belongings, he couldn't be bothered to use the correct name. Donald, I said carefully, what do you remember about Scott? What do you mean? Tell me something you remember about my husband, a conversation you had, something he enjoyed, a story he told. Anything. Silence stretched. When Donald spoke again, his voice had lost its false warmth. Look, Lillian, I don't know what kind of game this is, but it's not a game. You're asking for his most precious possessions. Surely you must have some memory of the man who owned them. More silence. I could hear Donald breathing, probably looking to Harper for help. He was a good guy, quiet, liked his workshop. What? Did he build in his workshop? Tools and things, guy stuff. I closed my eyes. Scott had spent countless hours in that workshop crafting furniture for Harper's house, a dining table, bookshelves, a toy chest for Penelope. Donald had been present when Scott delivered each piece, had shaken his hand, had accepted his craftsmanship without ever asking about the hours of labor involved, the care taken with each joint and finish. Donald, I said quietly. You don't remember him at all, do you? That's not... Harper said you were being difficult about this. Look, those watches are just going to sit there. At least I'd use them for what? What? For what would you use them? What occasions? What moments in your life are important enough to warrant wearing a watch that meant something to someone else? Jesus, Lillian, they're just watches. Expensive ones that are going to waste. Just watches. I thought of Scott's hands polishing each timepiece, of the stories behind every acquisition, of the patient way he'd tried to share that passion with. A son-in-law who saw only dollar signs. You're right, I said. They are expensive. Finally, some sense. So, you'll send them? No, I'll sell them. The silence that followed was profound. When Donald spoke again, his voice had dropped to a threatening whisper. That's not what Scott would have wanted. How would... You know what Scott wanted? You never bothered to learn his name. Now you listen to me. I hung up. The phone rang again immediately. I unplugged it from the wall. By evening, my doorbell was chiming insistently. Through the peephole, I saw Harper's face flushed with anger, Donald hovering behind her. I considered not answering, but that would only delay the inevitable. Mom, what the hell is wrong with you? Harper pushed past me into the hallway, the moment I opened the door. Donald said you were completely unreasonable on the phone. I asked him what he remembered about your father. He couldn't answer. So what? Not everyone processes grief the same way. She whirled to face me, her eyes blazing. You're punishing us because we don't grieve like you do. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm making decisions about your father's belongings. Donald stepped forward, his jaw tight. Those watches are family heirlooms. They should stay in the family. They are staying in the family with me. You don't even wear men's watches. Harper's voice rose to a near shout. You're hoarding Dad's stuff out of spite. Spite? I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. At 32, she had Scott's dark hair, but none of his patience. My green eyes, but none of my resilience. She'd grown beautiful and self-centered, confident that her needs would always take precedence over anyone else's. Tell me, Harper, what do you remember about your father's final months? Don't do this guilt trip thing. I called him every week. You called him when you needed something. Money for Penelope's school, help with your mortgage payment, advice about Donald's job situation. When did you call just to hear his voice? Harper's mouth opened, then closed. Donald put a protective hand on her shoulder. Lillian, you're obviously still processing Scott's death. Maybe you should talk to someone. Someone like who? A grief counselor? A therapist? I smiled without warmth. Funny how concerned you both are about my mental state now that I'm not giving you what you want. The watches are perfect for Donald, Harper said, her voice taking on the wheedling tone that had worked so well when she was younger. Dad would want them worn, not locked away like museum pieces. Your father wanted to see his granddaughter more than twice a year. He wanted his son-in-law to remember his name. He wanted to matter to his family beyond his ability to provide financial support. I stepped closer to Harper, watching her face. He wanted you at his funeral. I explained about Penelope. Penelope had a cold, not pneumonia, not scarlet fever. A cold. Donald couldn't get time off. Donald took time off the week before to play golf with his clients. I saw the photos on his social media. Harper's face went white. You were stalking our social media. I was looking at pictures of my granddaughter, trying to see her grow up from a distance since you rarely brought her to visit. The truth hung in the air like smoke, acrid and unavoidable. Harper looked at Donald, who was studying his shoes with sudden fascination. When she turned back to me, her expression had hardened into something I'd never seen before. Cold calculation mixed with genuine hatred. Fine. Keep the watches, keep everything, but don't expect us to come running when you're old and need help. Don't expect Penelope to remember a grandmother who was too bitter to show love to her own family. The words were designed to wound, and they did. But beneath the pain, I felt something else rising. A clarity so sharp it almost took my breath away. Harper, I said quietly, you just threatened to withhold your child from me unless I give your husband expensive gifts. Do you hear yourself? I'm telling you the truth about consequences. No. You're showing me exactly what kind of person you've become. I opened the front door, cool evening air washing over us. I think you should leave, Mom. Leave both of you. They did. Donald muttered under his breath, and Harper remained silent until they reached their car. Then she rolled down the window and called back, You'll regret this. When you're alone and have no one, remember that you chose this. I stood in my doorway until their taillights disappeared. Then I went inside and sat in Scott's chair, surrounded by the weight of his presence and the echo of his wisdom. The watch collection gleamed in its case, each timepiece marking moments that mattered, hours that had been treasured, time that had been valued. I understood now why Scott had kept them so carefully. They weren't just watches. They were proof that time had meaning, that moments could be preserved, that some things were worth protecting from people who saw only their surface value. Tomorrow, I would begin making plans. Tonight, I would sit with the truth Harper had finally revealed. She'd been holding my granddaughter hostage to my compliance all along. The love I'd thought was complicated had been a simple business transaction. But transactions could be renegotiated, and some debts came due in ways the debtor never expected. I woke the next morning with unusual clarity, as if sleep had burned away the last vestiges of the woman I'd been before Scott's death. The house felt different, not empty, but expectant, like a stage waiting for the next act to begin. My first call was to Scott's lawyer, Christopher Gibson, who had handled our wills and estate planning for 15 years. "Lillian, how are you managing?" His voice carried genuine warmth. Christopher had known Scott since law school. He'd grieved with me at the funeral. "I'm managing well, thank you. I need to discuss Scott's estate, specifically some decisions about his personal property." "Of course, what can I help clarify?" I explained about the watches, about Harper's demands, about the confrontation the night before. Christopher listened, without interruption, occasionally making small sounds of understanding. "Legally, you have complete discretion over Scott's personal effects," he said when I finished. "The will doesn't specify individual items beyond the house and financial assets. But Lillian, are you sure about this path? Family rifts can be permanent," I finished. "Christopher, my daughter threatened to keep my granddaughter away from me unless I give her husband expensive gifts. That's not a family relationship. That's extortion." Silence stretched between us. When Christopher spoke again, his tone had shifted to purely professional. "What exactly do you need from me?" "I want to establish a charitable foundation, small, focused. I want it funded by the sale of Scott's watch collection, and I want Harper to know exactly what I'm doing with the money." "What kind of foundation?" I looked out the window at Scott's garden, at the roses he'd planted for our anniversary 5 years ago. Something that helps people who've been abandoned by their families. Elder care, maybe, or support for grandparents raising grandchildren whose parents are absent. Christopher was quiet for a long moment. "That's actually quite elegant and entirely within your rights. Do you want me to draft the paperwork?" "Yes." "And Christopher, I want this done quickly before I lose my nerve. Lillian, if you don't mind my asking, are you sure this isn't about grief? Sometimes when we're—" "Christopher," I interrupted gently, "Scott wrote me letters before he died. Letters about Harper's behavior, about Donald's disrespect, about watching his family treat him like an ATM. This isn't grief talking. This is my husband's final wisdom finally being heard." After I hung up, I sat in Scott's study, surrounded by his presence. The watch collection caught the morning light, each timepiece a small monument to care and attention. Harper saw dollar signs, Donald saw status symbols, but Scott had seen stories worth preserving. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Penelope. Mommy gave me your phone number. She says, 'You're sick and might not want to see me anymore. Are you sick, Grandma Cat?'" The message hit like a physical blow. Penelope was 8 years old, 8. And Harper was already poisoning her against me, using my granddaughter's love as another weapon. I stared at the text until my hands stopped shaking, then called the number. Grandma Cat. Penelope's voice was sunshine through the phone. "Mommy said you might not answer because you're upset about something. I'm not upset with you, sweetheart. Never with you. Mommy says you're mad at Daddy Donald about Grandpa's watches. She says you won't give them to him, even though Grandpa would want Daddy to have them." Penelope's voice grew smaller. "Did I do something wrong? Is that why you don't want to see me?" The manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty. Harper was using an 8-year-old child as a messenger, forcing Penelope to navigate adult conflicts she couldn't possibly understand. "Penelope, listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "You have done nothing wrong. Nothing. I love you completely, and that will never change. But Mommy says, sometimes grown-ups have disagreements about things that have nothing to do with children. This is one of those times. Your mommy and I need to work some things out, but that doesn't change how much I love you. Can I still come visit you? I miss Grandpa's workshop. I miss the way he smelled like wood and that soap he used." My throat closed. "I miss that too, sweetheart. Mommy says we might not visit anymore because you're being difficult, but I don't want to stop visiting. Who will teach me to use Grandpa's tools?" The question broke something in me. Scott had been teaching Penelope woodworking basics, simple projects with child-safe tools he'd bought specifically for her visits. She'd been building a birdhouse, working on it a few minutes each visit. It sat unfinished in his workshop, waiting for small hands that might never return. "Penelope, I want you to remember something. No matter what happens with the grown-ups, no matter what anyone tells you, I love you and I want to see you. Can you remember that?" "I'll remember. But Grandma Cat, why do grown-ups make everything so complicated? Out of the mouths of babes?" "I don't know, sweetheart. I really don't know." After we hung up, I sat in the profound silence of my house, understanding finally the full scope of Harper's strategy. She wasn't just demanding the watches. She was systematically dismantling every relationship that mattered to me, using Penelope as both shield and sword. But Harper had made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated the woman who had raised her. That afternoon, I drove to Scott's favorite jewelry store where he'd bought every piece in his collection. Paul Hathaway had known my husband for 20 years. He'd been at the funeral, one of the few people who truly mourned Scott's passing. "Lillian," he said, standing as I entered, "how can I help you today? I want to sell Scott's watches, all of them." Paul's eyebrows rose. "All of them? Are you sure? That's a significant collection. Maybe you should take some time to." "I'm sure." I opened my purse and withdrew the insurance appraisal Scott had updated just last year. "I believe this reflects current market value." Paul studied the documents, his expression growing increasingly serious. "Lillian, this collection is worth nearly $40,000. Are you certain about this decision?" "Completely certain. And Harper, she's comfortable with selling her father's collection." I met his eyes directly. "Harper won't be inheriting the watches." Understanding flickered across Paul's face. He'd known our family for years, had watched Penelope grow up through our visits to his store. He'd also witnessed Harper's behavior at family gatherings, her impatience, her focus on price rather than craftsmanship, her casual dismissal of things that mattered to her father. "I can have everything appraised and ready for sale within a week," he said quietly. "Would you like to keep anything?" "The Timex, maybe. It has sentimental value beyond its monetary worth." "No, all of them." "What should I do with the proceeds?" "I'll have my lawyer contact you with instructions. The money will be going to charity." That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, crafting the most important letter I'd ever written. When I finished, I read it through 3 times, hearing Scott's voice in every line, feeling his steady presence guiding my words. The next morning brought another unknown number calling my phone. "Lillian, this is Pamela, Penelope's teacher." The voice was hesitant, concerned. "I hope you don't mind Penelope giving me your number. She seemed quite upset yesterday, and she mentioned some family troubles." I straightened in my chair. "What kind of troubles?" "She said her mommy told her she might not be able to visit her grandma anymore because her grandma was sick and angry. When I asked about it, she started crying. She's been talking about you and her grandfather a lot since he passed. I just wanted to make sure everything was all right." Another piece of Harper's strategy revealed. She was telling Penelope I was sick, unstable, unpredictable, laying groundwork to justify cutting off contact completely. "Pamela, I appreciate your concern. There are some family disagreements happening, But Penelope hasn't done anything wrong. I love her very much. She loves you too. She talks about woodworking projects, garden vegetables, and stories you tell. You're very important to her." Pamela paused. "Lillian, I hope you don't mind my asking, but is there anything I can do? Sometimes when families are struggling, schools can help bridge communication." For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope. "Actually, there might be. Would it be possible for you to let Penelope know that I'm doing well, that I'm not sick or angry with her, and that I hope to see her soon?" "Of course. And Lillian, Penelope is a remarkable child. Whatever's happening with the adults, please don't let it cost her a relationship with someone who clearly loves her so much." After we hung up, I realized Harper had inadvertently given me something precious, direct contact with Penelope's world outside her parents' control. Pamela had seen through Harper's narrative and had reached out because she cared about my granddaughter's well-being. I wasn't as isolated as Harper wanted me to believe. That afternoon, Christopher called with an update. "The foundation paperwork is nearly complete. I've also spoken with Paul Hathaway about the watch collection. Lillian, are you prepared for Harper's reaction when she learns what you've done?" "I'm counting on it," I said. "This is going to burn bridges." "Christopher, the bridges were already burned. I'm just cleaning up the ashes." By evening, I had written 3 more letters. One to Penelope, to be held in trust until she turned 18, one to Donald, explaining exactly why his casual disrespect had consequences, and one to Harper, containing truths I'd spent 32 years trying to soften. As I sealed the final envelope, my phone rang. Harper again. "Mom, we need to talk. Penelope's been crying about not seeing you. Maybe we can work something out about the watches." The conciliatory tone didn't fool me. This was strategy, not sentiment. Harper realizing that her nuclear option of withholding Penelope might have backfired. "Yes," I said calmly. "We do need to talk. I have some things to tell you." "Good. Can we come over tomorrow evening after Penelope's dance class?" "That would be perfect," I said. "I'll have everything ready." After I hung up, I sat in Scott's chair, surrounded by the evidence of a life lived with intention. His books, his tools, his carefully tended garden visible through the window. Tomorrow, Harper would learn what happened. When you mistook kindness for weakness, when you confused love with transaction. Tomorrow she would discover that some gifts once refused were never offered again. And tomorrow, I would begin building a new legacy, one that honored Scott's memory and protected other families from the kind of exploitation I'd endured for too long. The watch collection gleamed in its case one final time, each timepiece marking not just ours, but the end of an era and the beginning of something entirely new. The empty watch case sat on my dining room table like an accusation. Paul had collected the timepieces that morning, each one carefully documented and photographed. The insurance check for $38,400 lay beside it, already endorsed to the Lillian and Scott Morrison Foundation for Family Dignity. I'd spent the day preparing for Harper's visit with the methodical care of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. Every document was organized, every statement rehearsed, every possible response anticipated. On the kitchen counter sat a small cardboard box, sealed and addressed. Inside were Scott's ashes, a portion I'd kept separate from the main burial, and 2 letters that would change everything. At 5:30, car doors slammed in my driveway. Through the window, I watched Harper emerge from her BMW, her movements sharp with barely contained irritation. Donald followed, checking his phone. Penelope bounded toward my front door, her face bright with excitement. "Grandma Cat." She threw herself into my arms the moment I opened the door, her small body warm and solid against me. "I missed you so much." "I missed you too, sweetheart." I held her close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, feeling the rapid beat of her heart against my chest. Over her head, I met Harper's eyes. My daughter's expression was carefully neutral, but I caught the calculating gleam beneath her composed surface. "Mom," Harper said, stepping inside with the cautious air of someone entering potentially hostile territory. "Thank you for agreeing to talk." Donald nodded curtly in my direction. "Lillian, hope we can work this out like adults." "I'm sure we can," I replied, my voice pleasant. "Penelope, would you like to see how Grandpa's roses are doing? I think there might be some strawberries ready in the garden, too." "Can I, Mommy, please?" Harper hesitated, clearly wanting to keep Penelope close as both shield and witness to whatever negotiation she planned. But refusing would make her look petty in front of her daughter. "Just for a few minutes," she said. "Don't go far." Penelope skipped toward the back door, her happiness a sharp contrast to the tension filling my living room. Once she was outside, Harper's mask slipped entirely. "Okay, Mom, let's cut to the chase. Penelope's been miserable, crying every night about not seeing you. This whole thing has gone too far." She settled onto my couch with practiced ease, crossing her legs and fixing me with the look that had worked so well throughout her childhood. "I think we can find a compromise about Dad's watches. Maybe Donald could take a few of the less valuable ones and you could keep the rest." "That's generous of you," I said, taking the chair across from her. "Unfortunately, there's a problem with that plan." "What kind of problem?" "The watches are gone." The silence that followed was profound. Harper's composure cracked, confusion replacing calculation. "Gone? What do you mean gone?" "I sold them, all of them, yesterday." Harper's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally dawning outrage. "You what?" "I sold your father's watch collection to Paul Hathaway, $3,400, quite a bit more than their original purchase price, actually." "You can't do that." Harper shot to her feet, her voice rising. "Those are family heirlooms. They belong to all of us." "No, Harper, they belong to your father, and now they belong to me, past tense in both cases." Donald stepped forward, his face flushed. "This is insane, Lillian. You sold them out of spite because we wouldn't play your emotional games." "I sold them because neither of you deserve them." My voice remained calm, conversational. "Donald, in 3 years of marriage to my daughter, you never once asked Scott about his hobby, never showed interest in the stories behind those watches, never even bothered to learn his name correctly. Why would you deserve his most treasured possessions? That's not fair." "Let me tell you what's not fair." I stood slowly, drawing myself to my full height. "What's not fair is a daughter who visits twice a year but calls monthly for money. What's not fair is a son-in-law who treats his wife's father like a walking ATM. What's not fair is missing your father's funeral because your child has a cold." Harper's hands were shaking. "You vindictive... Where's the money? What did you do with it?" "I donated it to a foundation I established in your father's memory, the Lillian and Scott Morrison Foundation for Family Dignity. It provides support for elderly people who've been abandoned by their children and for grandparents raising grandchildren whose parents are absent." The color drained from Harper's face. "You're lying." I walked to the dining room table and returned with a folder of documents, the foundation paperwork, the sale receipts, the deposit confirmation. All quite real, I'm afraid. Harper snatched the papers, her eyes scanning frantically as she read. Her expression shifted from disbelief to fury to something approaching panic. "You can't do this. We'll contest it. We'll sue you for what? Donating my own property to charity?" I smiled without warmth. "I spoke with Christopher Gibson extensively about the legality of my actions. Everything was done properly." Donald grabbed the papers from Harper's hands, his face darkening as he read, $38,000. Gone, just like that. "Not gone," I corrected. "Put to good use, unlike the people demanding it. This is about Penelope, isn't it?" Harper's voice turned desperate, grasping. "You're punishing us because Penelope hasn't been able to visit as much. This has nothing to do with Penelope. This is about you using Penelope as a weapon against me." I never... You gave an 8-year-old child my phone number and coached her to call me about family problems she shouldn't have to understand. You told her I was sick and angry and might not want to see her anymore. You made that child cry over adult conflicts. My voice hardened. And then you used her tears as leverage in our conversation yesterday. Harper's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. She hadn't expected me to know about Penelope's call, hadn't anticipated that her strategy might backfire. Furthermore, I continued, you've been telling people I'm mentally unstable, that grief has made me irrational. Penelope's teacher was concerned enough to call and check on my well-being. Imagine her surprise when she found a perfectly coherent woman who simply asked her to reassure a child that her grandmother loved her. You talked to Penelope's teacher? Harper's voice was barely a whisper. I talked to someone who actually cares about Penelope's emotional well-being. Someone who noticed when your daughter was crying at school because her family was falling apart and her grandmother was supposedly too sick and angry to see her. Donald stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threatening growl. You listen to me, Lillian. You're going to fix this. You're going to get those watches back, or what? I turned to face him fully. You'll keep Penelope away from me. You already threatened that. You'll tell people I'm unstable. You already did that too. What exactly do you have left to take from me, Donald? He opened his mouth, then closed it, clearly realizing he'd played all his cards already. But I do have something for you both, I continued, walking to the kitchen. Counter. I returned with the sealed cardboard box. Since you were so eager to inherit something from Scott. Harper stared at the box suspiciously. What is it? Open it. With trembling hands, Harper tore open the package. Inside, she found a simple wooden urn and 2 sealed envelopes. Her face went white. Those are your father's ashes, I said quietly. The portion I kept separate from the main burial. I thought you might want them since you couldn't be bothered to attend his funeral. Harper's hands shook as she lifted the urn. You can't. This is sick. The first letter is from your father. He wrote it 3 weeks before he died, after you called asking for money for Penelope's dance lessons, but couldn't spare time to visit. He wanted you to know how much your absence hurt him, but also that he still loved you. He hoped maybe someday you'd find time to read his words, since you never found time to hear them while he was alive. Harper's face crumpled, tears beginning to flow. But I wasn't finished. The second letter is from me. It explains how I'll be using the watch money to travel to South America, working with organizations that help abandoned elderly and displaced families. I'm leaving next month, and I don't know when I'll be back. Maybe a year, maybe 5 years, maybe never. You can't leave, Harper whispered. What about Penelope? What about us? What about you? I asked gently. You've made it very clear that I'm only valuable to you as a source of money and free babysitting. Since I'm no longer providing either, what exactly would you miss about me? The question hung in, the air like smoke. Harper looked at Donald, at the urn in her hands, at the documents scattered around my living room. For the first time in years, she seemed to see the full scope of what she'd lost. Not just the watches, not just the money, but the relationship she'd spent years taking for granted. Mom, she said, her voice breaking. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. We can fix this. We can. No, Harper, we can't. I sat back down, suddenly feeling, every one of my 59 years, you threatened to keep my granddaughter away from me unless I gave your husband expensive gifts. You used an 8-year-old child as a messenger in an adult conflict. You told people I was mentally unstable because I wouldn't comply with your demands. Those aren't mistakes, sweetheart. They're choices, and choices have consequences. Outside, Penelope's laughter drifted through the window as she chased butterflies in Scott's garden. The sound was pure joy, untainted by the ugly realities unfolding in my living room. So that's it. Donald's voice was flat, defeated. You're just going to disappear and abandon your own granddaughter. I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm removing myself from a toxic situation before it destroys what little love remains. I looked at Harper, memorizing her face, trying to find traces of the sweet child she'd once been. If Penelope wants to find me, when she's older, when she can make her own choices about relationships, I'll be waiting, but I won't spend whatever years I have left being treated like a convenient resource by people who mistake manipulation for love. The finality in my voice seemed to penetrate Harper's shock. She clutched the urn closer, tears streaming down her face. Please don't do this. Please, I'll change. We'll change. Will you? Can you? I stood and walked to the window, watching Penelope explore the garden Scott had built with such care. Because this isn't the first time we've had this conversation. Harper, it's just the first time I've had the clarity to see it for what it really is. 3 weeks later, I stood in my empty living room, surrounded by boxes labeled for storage, charity, and my single suitcase bound for Lima. The house felt like a shell of itself, but not sad, more like a butterfly's discarded cocoon, no longer needed for the creature that had emerged. Penelope sat cross-legged on the bare floor, carefully wrapping the small wooden jewelry box Scott had made for her in bubble wrap. At 8 years old, she was handling this transition with more grace than either of her parents. "Are you sure you want me to have this, Grandma Cat?" she asked, her voice solemn. "It was Grandpa's work." "I'm sure, sweetheart. He made it specifically for you. It should go with you." I knelt beside her, helping to secure the wrapping. "And you remember what I told you about the other things? The letters you wrote for me are with Lawyer Christopher, and I can read them when I'm 18. The house will wait for me if I want it someday. And you'll always love me, no matter where you are or how long you're gone." Penelope recited the words with the careful precision of someone who'd been made to repeat them until they stuck. "That's right. All of that is true forever, no matter what anyone tells you." The front door opened, and Pamela, Penelope's teacher, entered with a warm smile. Over the past weeks, she'd become an unexpected ally, someone willing to maintain a connection between Penelope and me without the toxic filter of Harper's manipulation. "How's our girl doing?" Pamela asked, settling onto the floor with us. "I'm okay," Penelope said, though her voice was smaller than usual. "I wish Grandma Cat didn't have to go so far away." "Sometimes adults need to take journeys to heal their hearts," Pamela said gently, "and sometimes those journeys help them love even better when they come back." I caught Pamela's eye over Penelope's head, grateful for her instinctive understanding. She'd agreed to be a neutral point of contact, someone Penelope could talk to about her grandmother without fear of parental retaliation. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was protection. "Besides," I added, "I'll send you postcards from every country I visit, and when you're older, maybe you can come visit me wherever I am." Penelope's face brightened at this possibility. "Really? Even if I'm far away?" "Especially then. By the time you're old enough to travel alone, you'll be able to make your own decisions about who you want in your life." The subtext wasn't lost on Pamela, who nodded approvingly. I was planting seeds for Penelope's future, ensuring she'd know she had choices her parents couldn't control forever. A car door slammed outside. Through the window, I saw Harper approaching with reluctant steps, her face a mask of carefully controlled emotion. She'd been avoiding me since the confrontation 3 weeks ago, sending Donald to handle necessary communications about Penelope's visits. Today was different. Today was goodbye. "Mommy's here," Penelope announced unnecessarily. Harper entered. Without knocking, her eyes immediately finding Penelope. "Time to go, sweetheart. Say goodbye to Grandma." "Not yet." Penelope's voice rose with distress. "We're not finished talking, Penelope." Harper's tone carried warning. I said, "It's time." I watched this interaction with the clarity that had become my constant companion. Harper wasn't protecting Penelope from a difficult goodbye. She was asserting control, demonstrating that even this final moment belonged to her to grant or withdraw. Actually, I said quietly, I think Penelope should have as much time as she needs. This is an important conversation. Harper's jaw tightened. She's my daughter. I decide. Of course, she's your daughter, but she's also a person with her own feelings about saying goodbye to someone she loves. I stood slowly, my voice remaining calm. Unless you're planning to rush this moment because it's inconvenient for you. The challenge hung in the air. Harper looked at Pamela, clearly uncomfortable with having a witness to this exchange, then back at Penelope, who was watching both adults with the sharp awareness children develop when their world becomes unpredictable. Fine, Harper said, but we can't stay long. I understand. I'm sure you're eager to get this behind you. I knelt back down beside Penelope. What else did you want to talk about, sweetheart? Will you write me letters? Real ones, not just postcards. Every month I'll tell you about the places I see and the people I meet. And you can write to me too, whenever you want. Pamela has my contact information. Penelope nodded, then threw her arms around my neck. I love you, Grandma Cat. I don't understand why you have to go away. I love you too, more than you can imagine. I held her close, memorizing the feel of her small arms, the scent of her hair, the warmth of her trust. Sometimes grown-ups make choices that are hard for children to understand. But those choices don't change how much we love the children in our lives. Over Penelope's shoulder, I saw Harper's face crumple briefly before she regained control. For just a moment, I caught a glimpse of the daughter I'd raised, someone capable of recognizing the pain she'd caused. Someone who might have chosen differently if she'd possessed the courage to admit her mistakes. But the moment passed, and Harper's expression hardened again into familiar resentment. Come on, Penelope. Grandma has a plane to catch. Penelope pulled back from our embrace, her eyes bright with unshed tears. When will you come back? I don't know yet, but when I do, you'll be one of the first people I want to see. Promise? I promise. Penelope hugged me one more time, then stood and walked to her mother with the dignity of someone far older than 8. Harper took her hand, and for a moment, I thought my daughter might say something, an apology, a plea, an acknowledgement of what was ending between us. Instead, she said, I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. I already have, I replied. I found my self-respect. They left without another word, Penelope turning to wave from the car window until they disappeared around the corner. Pamela and I stood in my empty living room, the silence filled with everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. That was beautifully handled, Pamela said finally. You protected her from the worst of it while still maintaining your boundaries. I hope so. I keep wondering if I'm being selfish, leaving when she needs stability. Lillian, you can't provide stability to a child when you're being systematically undermined by her parents. What you've given Penelope is something more valuable. The knowledge that she's worthy of love without conditions, and that standing up for yourself isn't cruelty. It's necessary. 2 hours later, Christopher Gibson arrived with the final paperwork and keys to my safety deposit box. We sat at my kitchen table, the only furniture remaining in the house, and reviewed everything one last time. The foundation is fully established and funded, he said, handing me a folder. The house is in trust for Penelope, with you maintaining lifetime residence rights if you choose to return. Your power of attorney documents are current, and I have full authorization to handle your affairs while you're traveling. And if something happens to me, everything goes to Penelope when she turns 25, with a provision for education expenses before then. Harper has no legal claim to any of it. I nodded, feeling the satisfaction of a well-constructed plan. Thank you, Christopher, for everything. Lillian, are you sure about this? It's not too late to change your mind, to try reconciliation. With whom? A daughter who threatened to withhold my granddaughter unless I gave her husband expensive gifts? A son-in-law who couldn't be bothered to learn my husband's name in 3 years? I shook my head. Some bridges aren't worth rebuilding. Christopher gathered his papers, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, I think Scott would be proud of you. He always said you were stronger than you knew. After he left, I sat alone in my empty house as shadows lengthened across the bare floors. In a few hours, I'd be on a plane to Peru, beginning a journey I'd planned for weeks, but dreamed of for years. The volunteer organization I'd contacted needed experienced coordinators for their programs, helping displaced families and elderly people without support systems. My nursing background and decades of organizational experience made me valuable to them in ways that had nothing to do with money or convenience. For the first time in my adult life, I would be valued for what I could contribute, not what I could provide. My phone buzzed with a text from Donald. "This is all your fault. Harper's been crying for days. You destroyed our family." I read the message twice, then deleted it without responding. Let him rage, let them both rage. I was done absorbing other people's anger, done apologizing for protecting myself, done shrinking to make others comfortable. At the airport, I sat in the departure lounge, watching families say goodbye. Some tearful, some excited, all of them choosing to be there for each other in moments that mattered. A young woman helped her elderly father navigate the security line. A teenage boy hugged his grandmother before heading off to college. Normal families, making normal efforts to maintain connection across distance and time. I felt no envy, only a deep sense of peace. Some stories ended with reconciliation, others ended with freedom. Both could be victories, depending on what you'd survive to earn them. My flight was called, and I walked toward the gate with my single carry-on bag and a heart lighter than it had been in years. Behind me lay a house that would wait, a granddaughter who would grow up knowing she was loved unconditionally, and a daughter who would finally learn what absence actually meant. Ahead lay mountains and villages, strangers who might become friends, work that mattered, and days that belonged entirely to me. As the plane lifted off, I pressed my face to the window and watched my city shrink below. Somewhere down there, Harper was probably still crying, still raging, still expecting someone else to fix what she had broken. But I was flying toward sunrise, carrying Scott's memory and my own hard-won wisdom to places where both would be welcomed, cherished, and put to good use. Some departures were beginnings, some goodbyes were gifts. This was both.